Hello music lovers and welcome. Thanks so much for dropping by. In this video, I'm going to be giving you my review of a cool show that I caught over the summer. It was a one of a kind. It never happened before. It may never happen again. Two rock icons, Billy Idol, Bryan Adams, for the first time ever, a co-headlining tour. It only went to 8 cities. And I caught it when it went through Bristow, Virginia back in August. And it was a really cool show. I'm going to give you my review and also going to take a look at some things that these two artists have in common, some things that they don't, and try to figure out how did they get so many hits between them. They certainly didn't do it by themselves. They had some help. And we're also going to answer some questions like which one of these two artists didn't play one of their #1 hits? And also, who was it that lost the master recordings for one of their biggest albums in the Universal Studios fire of 2008? Did Billy Idol really pass on a #1 smash hit from the Breakfast Club soundtrack? And what is the summer of '69 really about? Yeah, there's no way we'll stop this thing we started, so stay tuned for more. All right, so one of the reasons why I wanted to go see this show is because, hey, I grew up with these two guys, and I do like songs from both these artists. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that they're my favorite artists of all time, but I never saw them live. They got some good songs. As a matter of fact, I want to know what you liked from each of these dudes. At the end of this video, I'm going to have a poll. You can vote for Billy Idol or Bryan Adams, all right? That's going to be coming up later. So Billy starts off the show with Dancing with Myself, which is from his Generation X days, and then he goes into Flesh for Fantasy, which is a great tune that he co-wrote with Steve Stevens. Always did love this tune. It's got a nice groove to it, nice guitar work, and this song is definitely a product of not only working with Steve Stevens, but also producer Keith Forsey. This was a 3-part deal with Billy Idol. Because I remember when I first saw him, it was the Hot in the City video. And there was a disconnect between this punk rock image that Billy Idol had. It didn't really jive with the real poppy, synthesizer heavy sounds of Hot in the City. It didn't really, to me, something was off. But that's because Billy Idol was, he was coming from the, Britain punk scene, paired up with a classic rock guitarist here in the States with Steve Stevens and a poppy producer with Keith Forsey. Keith Forsey went on to write Flashdance, and he was big into soundtracks, Ghostbusters and Beverly Hills Cop. He's the one that wrote The Heat Is On and some other stuff too. And so the combination of the punk rock and the classic rock guitar and the pop production, that's Billy Idol. And so that explains why he looked tough, but he didn't always sound so tough. I mean, he definitely had a lot more pop-driven songs. And after this, we get into L.A. Woman, which is a cover of the old Doors classic. And I was always a fan of this Doors song, one of my favorites. And I actually thought that Billy Idol did this song justice. It sounded really good live, too. Another song that Billy Idol covered was Mony Mony, the old Tommy James and the Shondells song. Remember that one? And that was big for him. That went all the way to #1, and he didn't even perform it at this show. I thought that was pretty interesting. How many people have #1 hits and don't perform them? Aside from Styx, they won't play Babe. I should also mention that Bryan Adams, who's had 4 #1 hits, didn't play one of his, and I'll let you know which one that is later. Moving through the set list, Billy Idol whips out Eyes Without a Face, which is probably my favorite Billy Idol tune. I love the guitar work on this one. I mean, Steve Stevens has probably one of the most memorable, iconic guitar riffs that comes leaping out in the middle. So Steve Stevens, he's not the best guitarist on earth, but he gets it done, and he works great with Billy Idol to come up with some really memorable guitar parts that really made those songs the timeless classics that they are. And of course, Steve Stevens has some solo spots throughout the show. And that also includes the Top Gun anthem, which Steve Stevens played as well. And that's a song that he originally added to the Top Gun soundtrack. He performed it with Harold Faltermeyer, who did keyboards on Billy Idol's Whiplash Smile album. And speaking of movie soundtracks and Billy Idol, there's a rumor we gotta get straight. And so that means it's time for some Idol trivia. All right, so there's a rumor going around that Billy Idol passed on an offer to record the 1985 smash hit Don't You Forget About Me for the Breakfast Club soundtrack, which was eventually recorded by Simple Minds, where it reached #1 in the USA. Is this truth or fantasy? And the answer is fantasy. That's right. Billy Idol never passed on this song because he was never offered the song. He even addressed this in a tweet from 2014 where he says this: I asked Keith Forsey, if I turn down Don't You Forget About Me in the 80s, and he said no. I wrote it for Simple Minds. I rest my case. It does make you wonder, what if? What if Billy Idol had been offered that song? What if he did record it and it went to #1 for him? How would that have changed his career? What would that have meant for him? We'll never know. And certainly numbers aren't everything, because look at the next song that he does, Rebel Yell. His most iconic song didn't even crack the top 40 here in the US, only went as high as number 46. And there's something else that Billy Idol did pass on that could have been huge for him. And that brings us to another round of Idol trivia. Okay, so what movie did Billy Idol have to turn down due to his 1990 motorcycle accident? Was it A, Terminator 2, Judgment Day, B, Silence of the Lambs, C, The Addams Family, or was it D, a role in the movie Cape Fear? And yes, the answer is A, Terminator 2, Judgment Day. Now, to say that Terminator 2 did well at the box office is a bit of an understatement. I mean, it was the biggest movie of the year. At that time, it had one of the biggest opening weekends ever. The role that Billy Idol would have had was the arch nemesis, one of the biggest roles in the film. It was taken by Robert Patrick, and that was one of his first roles. It launched his career, and so who knows what it could have done for Billy Idol. But he did wind up in The Wedding Singer many years later with Adam Sandler, so he did finally make it to Hollywood. So Billy Idol ends his portion of the show with White Wedding for the encore. Great way to end a really nice performance. If I had to give pros and cons here, he and Steve Stevens, they're still in fine playing form. Billy, for his age, I think he's about 64 years old. He still sounds pretty good, and so he's got that going for him, definitely. Great performance. On the con side, he could have had more hits in the set. There was a section of about 4 songs, a couple of Generation X songs. Who cares about that? We don't want to hear Generation X-Lax. We want to hear hits. Where's Cradle of Love, Sweet 16, Moni Moni, your #1 hit that I talked about earlier, Don't Need a Gun, To Be a Lover. These are some songs that he could have featured in there. I mean, look, you're going up against Bryan Adams, who's got hit after hit after hit, so you got to come out swinging. So I thought he could have put some more hits in there. Also, Billy Idol comes across as more of a nostalgia trip back to the 80s. He's got the leather, the no shirt. Steve Stevens, he looks like he's right out of the 80s. How much longer is that going to go on? Is Billy Idol going to be 70 years old with the leather jacket and, Steve Stevens looking the way? I just don't know how many more years that whole shtick has. Whereas Bryan Adams looks like the guy next door. He looks like he could go another 20 years easy. So we'll see how that all works out. Now, speaking of Bryan Adams, one of the things I noticed was that he took full advantage of the screens behind the stage. Even before the show started, he had up his latest album cover, Shine a Light, and every now and then his eyes would move or something would change. Then the band comes out, and the first 4 songs, 3 of them are from the Reckless album, kicks things off with Somebody, and then Kids Wanna Rock. And one of the things about Bryan Adams, like Billy Idol, is that he has some long-time partnerships, most notably Mickey Curry on drums. This is a guy that's been playing with Bryan Adams for nearly 40 years. Also, Keith Scott on guitar, another guy that's been playing with Bryan Adams for decades. That says a lot about Bryan. It says a lot about somebody when you've got people working with you for such a long period of time. And then we get Run to You, which is also from the '84 album Reckless. So speaking of Reckless, Bryan Adams found out by reading the newspaper that there was this fire at Universal Studios back in 2008. Now, Universal owns A&M, and A&M Records is where Bryan Adams had all of his classic 80s albums, and this may explain why Bryan Adams wasn't able to find anything when he tried to reissue his album Reckless, his biggest album. Universal came up with nothing, and this is what he had to say about it. I contacted the archive department of Universal Music looking for the master mixes, artwork, photos, video, film, anything. I called everyone, former A&M employees, directors, producers, photographers, production houses, editors, even assistants of producers at the time. I can tell you with 100% certainty that I couldn't find anything at Universal that had been published to do with my association with A&M Records in the 1980s. If you were doing an archaeological dig there, you would have concluded that it was almost as if none of it had ever happened. There was no mention that there had been a fire in the archive. So yeah, this is a travesty on so many levels here. I mean, this is a fire that happened in 2008. Many artists just now finding out about it. They're going ballistic, a lot of lawsuits coming towards Universal. We're talking about over 100,000 masters that were destroyed, 500,000 songs, about 1,000 artists that were affected across many different genres. I mean, some of this stuff goes back to like the Chess label, early rock and roll, gone forever. What a travesty. And you know, if Reckless was gone, then that would mean Cuts Like a Knife. The masters for that are also destroyed, and appropriately, Into the Fire, another one of Bryan Adams' albums. That's probably exactly where it went. All right, so moving through the Bryan Adams set list, he pulls out Heaven, which is his first #1 hit single from the Reckless album from back in 1985. And this brings us to our first round of Adams Family Trivia. All right, so who played the drums on Bryan Adams' #1 hit from '85, Heaven? Was it A, Mickey Curry, his longtime drummer, B, Stan Lynch of the Heartbreakers, C, Clem Burke of Blondie, or was it D, Steve Smith of Journey? And the answer is D, Steve Smith of Journey. So yeah, Mickey Curry, Bryan's drummer, was supposed to play on the song, but he got pulled into a commitment with Hall & Oates and had to play on their album. So at the last minute, Bryan Adams called Steve Smith from Journey, who he had met when he was opening up for Journey in the early 80s on the Frontiers tour. And, you know, Bryan Adams was inspired by the big ballads that they were coming out with, like Faithfully and Open Arms and all this stuff. And so that kind of like inspired him to go down the path of coming up with a major hit like Heaven. And up next, Billy Idol joins Bryan Adams on stage for a cover of an old Eddie Cochran classic called Come On Everybody. And you'd have to believe this is the first time these two guys have ever taken the stage, and maybe the last time. You never know. And up next, we get It's Only Love, which was another track from the huge album Reckless. And it's a song that he originally did as a duet with Tina Turner. And here he kind of shares a spotlight with guitarist Keith Scott, who tries his best to hang in there with some of those really powerful choruses in this tune. And, you know, what's interesting about this one, you know, this album, Reckless, it had 10 songs on it. 6 of them were major, major hits. And another long-time partnership that Bryan Adams has had has been with his songwriting partner, Jim Vallance. They've written a lot of songs together. Most of the hits that Bryan Adams has had has been with Jim Vallance. And they not only wrote songs that Bryan sang, but they also wrote a bunch of songs for other artists too. And so here's more Adams Family Trivia. Which song did Bryan Adams co-write with Jim Vallance for other artists? Was it Joe Cocker's When the Night Comes, Roger Daltrey's Let Me Down Easy, Kiss's War Machine, Loverboy's Dangerous, 38 Special, Teacher Teacher, or all of the above? And the answer is F, all of the above. So yeah, Bryan Adams wrote a Kiss song. How about that? And a damn good one too. It's one of my favorite Kiss songs, War Machine from Creatures of the Night. Kiss are actually playing it on their current tour. And Bryan actually co-wrote another song on that album called Rock and Roll Hell. Another one of these songs that's really good is Roger Daltrey's Let Me Down Easy. Now that song, I think if Bryan had done it, it would have been a huge Reckless level hit. I mean, it sounds just like classic Bryan Adams from that 85 period. I'll throw that into the companion playlist to this video too, so you can check that out. Up next in the set list, Bryan pulls out Summer of '69. This was a great, you know, classic from the Reckless album, another one that's a favorite. And what's interesting about this song is the story behind it, okay? It's not about 1969, okay? Just so you know, it's not about the summer of that year, because think about it. If Bryan Adams is 60 now, he would have been 10 years old 50 years ago in the summer of 1969, and he's talking about love and all this stuff. So what could he be possibly talking about if it's not the year 1969? What could it possibly be? I don't know. Well, let's let him tell you. He says, I think summer of '69 is timeless because it's about making love in the summertime. There is a slight misconception it's about a year, but it's not. '69 has nothing to do about a year. It has to do with a sexual position. At the end of the song, the lyric says that it's me and my baby in a '69. You'd have to be pretty thick in the years if you couldn't get that lyric. Now, speaking of licking, did you know that Bryan Adams was featured on a Canadian stamp? I had no idea. He's also a professional photographer. Took a photo of the Queen of England, and that wound up on a stamp too. All right, so up next is Everything I Do It For You, which was another #1 hit for Bryan Adams. And I was working in radio at the time when this came out, and holy shitballs, am I sick of this one for sure. But this is when Bryan Adams started teaming up with Robert Mutt Lange, the great producer from the 80s who did stuff with, Foreigner and AC/DC and Def Leppard. As a matter of fact, Bryan Adams started to sound like a Def Leppard light in the 90s with stuff like, Thought I'd Die and Gone to Heaven and Can't Stop This Thing We Started, big choruses, big harmonies and that kind of thing. That's what Robert Mutt Lange did. And, Mutt had a great partnership with Bryan Adams through the 90s. That's one of the areas where Bryan Adams and Billy Idol differ, is that Billy Idol was done in 1990. That album, with Cradle of Love and everything, Charm Life, that was it. Whereas Bryan Adams kept on going through the 90s. His last #1 hit was in 1995 with Have You Ever Really Loved a Woman? And that's the one that he didn't do at this show. And so Bryan Adams, not only that, but even when he kind of lost touch with the American audiences, he still was very popular elsewhere. Like in Canada, his new album went to #1. As a matter of fact, everything that he's done for the past 40 years practically has been a top 5 album in Canada. And he's charted around the world in the past number of years where he didn't do much here. So Bryan Adams starts to wrap up the show with a couple of tracks from his Cuts Like a Knife album, This Time, and the title track, Cuts Like a Knife. I love both songs. And then he comes out for the encore acoustic versions of Straight from the Heart and All for Love. All for Love is another one of his #1 songs, and I always hated that song. That's another one that came out when I was in radio. It's a song that was for the Three Musketeers soundtrack, and they probably thought it would be cute to have Three Musketeers sing it. So it was Bryan Adams, Rod Stewart, and Sting, and I just could never, ever like this song at all. But overall, if I have to give pros and cons for the Bryan Adams show, Bryan Adams had a great set list. And, the band was playing very well. Like I said, he made really good use of the screens. The crowd was enjoying the show. He used the screens to showcase them as well. A lot of people dancing in the aisles and everything. And if I had to give any cons, I could have done without All for Love. I could have done with One Night Love Affair or In the Heat of the Night. I would have loved to have seen that. But he had so many hits in here, and he covered the bases that I got to give him props. So Bryan Adams, as I had mentioned earlier, he comes across as the guy next door. And I think that he keeps himself in good shape. He's got another 20 years of performances if he wants to go that route. Billy Idol, as I said, a bit more of a shtick. He comes across as more of a nostalgia act. But both artists still, after nearly 40 years, still giving some great performances. If you get a chance to go see either of these, definitely go do it. And be sure to vote. I'm going to throw up the poll now, and you can cast your vote for which artist you like better, Bryan Adams or Billy Idol. Okay, go ahead and vote. And be sure to check out the companion playlist. I'll throw it in the description down below. And let me know what you think about these guys. Let me know your favorite songs, any memories that you have. And be sure to click like if you enjoyed this video, okay? Be sure to give it a thumbs up. It'll help some other fans see this video. That's how YouTube works. And hit that subscribe button, all right? And more videos on the way. So stay tuned and take care.